if you take a look at the old FBI COINTELPRO files, you will notice a few things. For example, the techniques used were kind of universal. They were used against all these different targets, such as right-wing groups and left-wing groups and black groups and Indian groups and whatnot. And you also see kind of this magical number, 25%. The FBI or at some point CIA had similar programs against dissidents. They always want to control 25% of the target group's important, relevant members, kind of the leadership or the really active ones. It's always 25%. And so we have to ask ourselves, how does this kind of program, how are these programs still active today, and how this might affect alternative media or so-called conspiracy media. Now, of course, you will probably remember the academic Cass Sunstein, who was close to the Obama administration, declared he wants he's thinking about a cognitive infiltration of conspiracy circles. And if you actually read that paper from Cass Sunstein, it's kind of boring, right? It's kind of boring. He's talking about going into chat rooms and social media either directly with government people or indirectly with middlemen and cutouts, and confronting people with the facts or the official line of version of events. But of course, these methods are not very powerful, and even Cass Sunstein admits that in his text. He says, if you argue against certain conspiracies, the believers will believe even more in this conspiracy, despite the facts. Now that is true. Of course, there's garbage in conspiracy media. There's all kinds of stuff floating around that is not good work, and people still believe in it. And of course, if somebody criticizes a conspiracy theory or a piece of media work, that will likely lead to the accusation that the critic must be a CIA shill or a Zionist agent or some other nefarious person lying on purpose, right? That's something you find every day on Facebook and the comment section on YouTube. YouTube, by the way, is going to downrank and hide more and more conspiracy material in the future. The algorithm is being tweaked as we speak. And so it's not just good enough to toss around accusations, or this guy must be an agent, or that guy must be an agent because he doesn't share my beliefs. It doesn't work like that, right? If you want to understand who can be trusted, you have to go about it in a very professional way. You have to study the old COINTELPRO documents, which sometimes are very boring, because they're censored, because a lot of stuff is blacked out, and also if you read the naked files, for example, the COINTELPRO white hate program against KKK groups and other white supremacist groups, if you read these files, it can be very boring and it's very tedious to read, right? When the FBI made another cartoon about a certain group, or they spread some false letters around to create infighting or whatever, snitch jacketing, and these methods, it reads a bit boring. But then you have studies done on COINTELPRO that kind of go into the real meat and potatoes. False flagging, cases where confidential informants or confidential sources were pressured to get some radical to blow himself up with a bomb and things of that nature. Political assassinations and all these kind of things. And of course, if a government, or if pieces of government and agencies or parts of agencies, if they control 25% of the right wing and the ultra right wing, they control 25% of the left, radical left, they control 25% of all these other groups. Of course, then with this tool set, government can have all these groups attack each other till the cows come home. thereby creating the necessary tension that can be used for various purposes, again, by government. And so, how do you judge? How do you get a sense of who can be trusted in alternative media or conspiracy media? Now, you can be sure that when you have an overlap, then there's going to be snoops and spooks and spies. So for example, the ultra right wing, kind of the full blown neo-Nazi types, they have of course overlap with the alt right or the new right, and that has overlap with the classic conspiracy media. Now, a lot of these classic conspiracy media places like Infowars have sort of turned into these new right-wing, alt-right-wing outfits and have adapted their message, and they have changed a lot of topics. Alex Jones' Infowars has kind of flipped on FEMA camps. They're now our salvation as long as they're used against the left. He kind of flip-flopped on torture. He's flip-flopped on the Russian regime. He's now supporting the Republican Party. He's now supporting a Supreme Court candidate who's a trusted fellow traveler of the Bushes, and also a likely member of Skull and Bones, and all these kind of things. So there's always overlap, and when you have this overlap, of course, there's going to be an overlap of informants and agents. Now, you also have traditional left-wing circles that overlap with conspiracy media. Of course, there's espionage there. Then you have the New Age movement, which has overlap with the British-controlled Theosophy. And then the New Age movement is overlapping with the conspiracy media. So you have overlap everywhere. And of course, it's not just about the persons who are informants and snitches and agents. It's also about the ideas that are being spread, right? So if you can spread an idea that sounds neat to people, to the target audience, but it's also a very dangerous and destructive idea, then this idea will get picked up and repeated and repeated and repeated, and those people repeating the bad idea, they're not direct agents, they're not, they're not snitches or whatever, they're more like useful idiots. And so, kind of this Russian regime, Putin salvation, almost theology that we've seen for the last couple of years. Of course, that's been pushed by Russian intelligence, and that's also kind of encouraged by, I think, by Western intelligence, because that's how you discredit patriots, right? If they become traitors or sort of traitors, if they conspire with the Russians, of course, then you can blame them and you can destroy them. And this is also a technique that we've seen in COINTELPRO and these operations where, or CIA's Operation Chaos, where you get the targets. For example, it was the left in the Cold War. You get the left to get into bed with the Russians, communists at the time, and that, of course, created the pretext to go really, really hard to move in on those leftist groups and infiltrate them and use dirty tricks. And a lot of well-meaning agents went along because they thought they were fighting communism, and there was nothing more to it. So you have to look at persons, their psychological makeup, their personality type. You have to look at their message, and you have to be knowledgeable about topics. You have to read actual books, right? It's not good enough to watch YouTube or read a few things on the web. You have to read books. And the more you read about intelligence agencies, the more able you are to make calls and make judgments, right? And it's notoriously complicated to prove actual espionage and snitch activities. Really, really hard. Oftentimes you can never really prove whether or not somebody is a spook, but you can at least determine if that person is more or less likely a security risk. Now, for example, I would classify Alex Jones, after careful consideration, after years of looking at his work and how he changed, his work changed, I would consider Alex Jones to be a serious security risk. Not just a risk in terms of domestic agencies, but also foreign agencies. his impulsive behavior, his risky behavior, his irrational behavior, all these kinds of things that can make him or made him vulnerable. And of course, he changed all of his core ideas, and he's playing left versus right game, and on and on and on and on. And so, so then you have another technique, which is kind of like just, you know, spread money around, the CNP, Council for National Policy, and all these networks, and there's rich people in this network, Texas oil billionaires and or millionaires and whatnot, and they just pump money into certain right-wing groups, right-wing circles, and they create trends, okay? So you can create with money you can create a trend, and many are going to hop on this trend. Like, for example, this alt-right, new right thing. You see a lot of CNP people like Steve Bannon, and they're now trying to be more active in Europe over here. Kind of reminds me of the old days when the CIA brought just sacks of cash. The CIA brought sacks of cash to Europe to create kind of the political system in Europe after the war, and to create media. Sacks of cash. Now, of course, today this can be done more elegantly, but the technique is still the same. And of course, when people are attracted to power and success, so if something is successful, it gets copied again and again and again, even though the copycats are not directly working for an intelligence agency. So, yeah, then of course, this whole New Age thing, people have talked about this in a critical way, of course. Now, it's fine if people are spiritually interested and they want to go beyond the traditional religions, and they just want to experiment with... they want to experiment with meditation, or maybe with a hallucinogenic drug, which is dangerous. So if that's your thing, that's fine within certain boundaries. Of course, you have to stay away from narcissism and narcissistic ideas, and stay away from psychopathic ideas, and stay away from dangerous individuals, and stay away from dangerous ideas, okay? There's nothing wrong with visualizing success, and there's nothing wrong with surrounding yourself with positive people, and of course it's not useful to dwell on bad things all the time and all these negative thoughts, but don't get pulled into this magical mumbo-jumbo thinking where stuff that's been preached by David Icke and many others, that you cosmically attract bad things if you think about bad things. And if you're a dissident, or you show various kinds of resistance, that's supposed to be a bad thing, because you're attracting cosmically the bad stuff to happen. And what you should do, according to this weird way of thinking, what you should do is you should withdraw within yourself or within your circles of other New Age people, and you should just do magic rituals and have positive thoughts all the time and spread positive energy, and that's going to defend or defeat evil and or the reptilians or whatever. And of course, that is something an intelligence agency would like to spread. You know, this sort of self-defeatism and passive thinking and these mental chains, right? This is something that an intelligence agency would spread, but of course David Icke and many others, they just repeated what they've seen, what they've learned. And you can trace that sort of stuff back to the British establishment and the Theosophical Society. So, again, many people talk nonsense on the internet. Many people who talk nonsense are well-meaning, and they're not necessarily agents. There's no evidence that they're snitches or agents or whatever. If you want to find out if that's the case or not, you'd have to really dig deep on a certain person, find out about their money, about their contacts, and that sort of thing. So it's not an easy task, right? I mean, professionals all day will deal with counter-espionage, and that's a really tough business, and that's a really, really delicate business. Some people have called it an art. I wouldn't go as far as to call it an art form. It's just that whether you're on the left or in the middle or center or right wing, or whether you're into conspiracy, classic conspiracy media or not, you have to be aware how that game is played, and that things like COINTELPRO happened, and they wanted to control 25% of active individuals, important individuals with an audience. And so be aware of people, and be aware of false ideas that tell you what you want to hear, right? If an idea sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And oftentimes you can't really tell. You will never be able to tell if certain people in the conspiracy movement are agents or not. But you can make an analysis and determine for yourself if that person is likely a security risk, if that person is talking nonsense, if person has changed the story. And that has to be good enough, right? If you can determine I'm not going to trust that person, then you have made an informed choice. And that's better than an uninformed choice. And so you should read a lot of books about intelligence agencies and the sort of topics, because your time is very valuable and you need to build up skills. It's not good enough to just listen to conspiracy media for hours every day, because you can do that for 10 years and you still don't know enough about intelligence agencies and what really matters. So that's very, very key about this. And then, of course, you have historical bad information. Books like Proofs of a Conspiracy by John Robison, kind of the first bestseller book, yeah, in terms of conspiracy, modern conspiracy theories. And this became an influence for all subsequent conspiracy books, even though Robison's Proofs of a Conspiracy was written by a Freemason who loved the British king, and who also got his material from Alexander Horn, a British agent, basically. And in his book, he only blames Weishaupt's Illuminati for the French Revolution. He never tries to ascertain whether or not the British intelligence agency or British intelligence had something to do with it. So it's kind of a ridiculous book if you view it from a sober perspective. And then you had other weird books with weird people in the background, such as William Guy Carr's Pawns in the Game became a bestseller. Staple of conspiracy literature. This book is chock full of bad information, just a lot of hoaxes, a lot of bad information that has been debunked over and over again, and that just really destroys credibility. And it also drives people into this confirmation bias, and then of course you had kind of this distorted history of the last 200 years, distortion that only focuses on Jewish bankers and some Jewish people who were built up by this British Empire, and the legend and the myth that 5 banking brothers stole the British Empire without getting into any sort of trouble. And most classic conspiracy literature just prolongs these myths, and then of course you end up in a confirmation bias. People only read conspiracy stuff, they only listen to conspiracy stuff, and everything they see is a confirmation for their belief, and everything that contradicts their belief gets brushed aside as bad information or disinformation. So, for example, if you say, no, I think it's the royal families, not just the British royal family that sits on the throne, this is a whole network. These families, they have thousands and thousands and thousands of members, and they were the original intelligence agencies, basically. Houses like Hessen-Kassel, who built up the Rothschild, banking company, most likely with the Rothschilds as puppets and whatnot. If you deviate from that standard narrative of the Jewish world conspiracy, if you deviate from that, of course you get called a Zionist agent and a gatekeeper, and You get all this hatred, even though most people who believe regular standard conspiracy literature, most of these people, they haven't really studied the last 200-300 years, the power structure, the royal families, and the what I call the Game of Thrones, and these early intelligence networks. They stick with the myths, and that's it. So then, of course, you have people who think that no, it's not Jews, it's reptilians, or it's the Vatican that runs everything, and everybody has a different idea of how the power structures are and how they work and how they develop. And usually what happens, you get a group narcissism, whereas every critic gets branded an enemy agent, right? So you don't believe media today that's based on 200-year-old propaganda books, when, you know, from a time when the Catholics and the Protestants were battling each other with, you know, with disinfo and some truth, some harsh truths, and you can't just use that old source material nowadays that's been debunked over and over again to argue that the Vatican is behind everything. It's not scientific. It just doesn't really work. And if you really want to find out about the Vatican's role over the last, you know, 2,000 years, that's a major undertaking. You have to read a ton of literature to be competent when it comes to the Vatican. And at some point I'm gonna really go deep into that whole Vatican topic, and it's going to interlock with other parts of my work. But it's not as simple as just picking stuff up and saying, oh, the Vatican is behind everything. So somebody who disagrees with you, whether that person believes in a different conspiracy angle or that person loves the mainstream, every critic is not your enemy. Every critic is not an enemy agent. That's not how the world works. And so get good literature, learn about these different intelligence agencies over time, and then you can determine for yourself who you can trust and who you can trust and who is a security risk.